I said last time that this cover once again set off my Silver Age senses. I maintain that Silver Age sensibilities is a stupid power, but that doesn't change the fact that this is one of the biggest lying covers you could put on your comic book, especially after the series has been out a while. I mean, obviously Sonic's not going to die, or if he is going to die, it's not going to last for very long. Hey, so it's just like what Marvel and DC do. The cover also gives us a good benchmark of the artwork for this issue, which is unimpressive. Sorry, but after the relatively good artwork of the last issue, this one manages to pass by just barely. It's a real shame because it's once again Dave Manek behind the artist's chair, and his stuff is usually a lot better than what we see in this story. I don't know, maybe he was just under a strict time limit or something. The story starts with Sonic and Sally infiltrating one of Robotnik's facilities to destroy his new antimatter machine, as Sally's convinced that he could use it to make his robots invisible or something like that. But given that antimatter is literally the destruction of existing matter through antiparticles, I don't think she has to worry about that, since antimatter would just lead Robotnik to destroying his own forces. But this is a comic book where science need not apply. Sonic and Sally get separated, and while Sonic is surrounded by robots, he decides to take down the antimatter machine by blowing up the whole facility. It works, but in a genuinely emotional scene that would have a whole lot more impact if there were actually any ambiguity as to whether Sonic was dead or not, Sally tearfully tells the rest of the team that Sonic sacrificed himself to save the day. But sure enough, our hero is just fine, but he looks a bit less colorful. And once again, we have a pretty well-trodden trope of kids' shows, the hero who, through an unfortunate event, is in some sort of astral state and can't interact or communicate with their friends. And this one goes through all the motions, him trying to get in touch with them and being unable to, the one friend who doesn't believe they're really dead, the mock memorial, and I really do mean mock considering how that statue turned out. Reminds me of the clay statues I made back in kindergarten. Of course, Sonic's not actually dead. Due to technobabble, his body was temporarily rendered invisible and incorporeal, but as the story goes on, he becomes more solid, and even uses his newfound invisibility to stop Robotnik from destroying the Freedom Fighters when they decide to try and launch a suicide mission against Robotnik to avenge Sonic. Now this worked great several issues ago, but this seems to suggest that this wouldn't work at all. But thanks to Sonic acting like a ghost, Robotnik is literally scared into giving up the attack while Sonic meets up with the others. The story is pretty underwhelming if you couldn't tell. It's yet another by-the-numbers story that, while it tries to play the emotional card, falls flat because we're supposed to feel sad over a situation that's obviously false. If this were any other character in the comic, it might have had a lot more plausibility to it. But, I'm sorry, I couldn't say that with a straight face. This is comic books. Death is an inconvenience at best, no matter who you are. It's especially disappointing coming off of a pretty good story in the last issue, but there's not even that much comedy in this story. The last issue balanced drama and humor pretty well. This one is so straightforward and by the numbers that it barely leaves any sort of impact. The beginning with Sonic and Sally in the facility was probably the only part of this story that really had any sort of oomph to it in terms of the dialogue and the humor. In fact, you know what this reminds me of? Like, I know I mentioned that this is a very overplayed idea for a story in kids' media, but me specifically, I think of a very similar episode of the Legend of Zelda cartoon. It's almost note for note the same story and hits all of the same beats, with the only two differences being, 1, the spirit state doesn't wear off naturally for Link, he has to go and find his body, and 2, Zelda can still see and hear him. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the Zelda cartoon actually has the better story. Don't get me wrong, it's not brilliant by any means, but there is actual emotional investment. Ganon has Link's body, so there's actual tension in Link trying to get his body back, unlike Sonic, whose condition is revealed to be temporary, and therefore loses any and all tension because we know that all he has to do is wait it out and he'll be fine. The Zelda cartoon as a whole is not good, but that's a problem for another day, and believe me, I really don't like having to say that cartoon is better than one of my favorite comic series, but in this instance, it is just that. We have a short backup story to take a look at, and befitting the trend that we've seen in the main issues, the backup story is actually the best part of it. It's a short one, mostly setup, but is notable for a few reasons. It stars Sally on a solo mission to destroy one of Robotnik's facilities, and while she successfully plants and arms the bomb, she ends up running into one Jeffrey St. John, lead of the Underground Resistance, a group that Sally hasn't heard of, which immediately makes her very wary of him, just as a SWAT bot pulls itself out of the wreckage of the facility. This short story is really good. First off, the artwork is top-notch, probably the closest that we've gotten to the style of the TV show to date, so it just looks really good. The introduction of Jeffrey is a significant moment for the series, as he became a major recurring character for a very long time. Though, if I'm honest, I never found him that interesting of a character until way in the comics' future, which we'll get into when we get there. But one of the main reasons why I find this such a good story is its atmosphere. Look at the first 3 pages of the story, and what do you notice? That's right, aside from Nicole giving a few cursory computer words when she's used to hack security, there is no dialogue at all in this story until the end of the 3rd page. Believe it or not, that's actually pretty rare for comics, even by today's standards. And in a series where one of my biggest complaints of its early issues is that the characters would just not stop talking about what was happening right in front of them, that's a pretty big step forward. It creates an extreme atmosphere of loneliness and paranoia and silence. Sally is going on this mission alone into enemy territory. There's no one for her to banter with, there's no backup, she is completely on her own. Add to it the fact that she's even suspicious of St. John at all is a big plus in favor of her character development, since she's actually showing a level of pragmatism that she only showed in an exaggerated and bitchy way in the past. It makes a lot more sense, and it pretty much cements Sally coming into her own as a character that is more than just a bratty, overly full of herself princess. So, as you have no doubt noticed, the end of this story states that we're going to be continuing this story in the 3-issue Sally miniseries comic coming soon. Well, not really, because this was released back in the 90s. I'm sure you'd expect us to move straight into that for our next episode, and you would be wrong. According to the chronology flowchart I have for the series, and yes, I actually have a chronology flowchart to keep track of what issues come where, the Princess Sally miniseries won't be addressed until another 3 issues down the line. So sit back and relax, folks. We're going to issue 21 next. I'll see you all there.